Hello and welcome back to another episode of LeadHERs in Tech, the podcast that shines a light on wisdom and experiences of female leaders paving the way for the next generation of women in tech leadership. Joining us today is Charlotte Picker, a leader in both retail and technology sectors, now making her mark at Gymshark. Her journey is a fascinating mix of roles in industries, showing just how dynamic a career in tech can actually be. Charlotte's been instrumental in driving growth and championing inclusive environments for women. Charlotte has her own podcast, so should be an expert today. And we're going to delve into her experiences in mentoring, challenges that women face in tech leadership, and how to tackle issues like the Queen Bee syndrome. Charlotte, I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you for that amazing introduction, Emma. It's such a privilege, and thank you so much for inviting me to be a guest and speaking on this amazing podcast.
What I think would be a good place to start today, and I'm interested in hearing what your answer to this is going to be. Can you think of, off the top of your head, a female leader or somebody in your life who's given you some sort of inspiration that you've then gone ahead and used in your career?
Yes, I can think of many, actually. The most inspiring women that have come across in technology have not necessarily been the most senior. Some of them have been very senior. I can think of sort of like between 3 and 5. And I would say there are a couple of things I live and die by from learning from them. The first thing, and Emily, you will always certainly have heard me say this when we work together, that is all about progress over perfection. And the reason I hone in on this as one of the examples is, as a woman, you typically have that perfectionist gene. And as an eldest daughter, you definitely have that perfectionist gene. And I think one of the things I struggled with when I first went into the world of work was not delivering perfect. You know, you went to school and you got A grades, and and you're always striving to be the best. And then when you couldn't deliver exactly the exact thing, the perfect solution, I always took that really personally. And one of the things I learned fairly early on from some of the, female leaders and women that I worked with that weren't in a leadership role, but I was inspired by, progress over perfection has really guided me well since then, because, what I do, it's not brain surgery. No one's going to die. It's retail and e-commerce typically. So I think it's really important to deliver some value and deliver it frequently. And it might not be the perfect solution straight away, but to take that and be at peace with it. And it's certainly something I have encountered with direct reports of my own who, again, have struggled with that perfectionism. And I really do think it's something you see more in women than you do in men. I have seen it in men, but definitely more so in women. And, trying to drill in that progress over perfection piece, it's tough.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because sometimes you can deliver something that is really, really, really closely to the brief of what you've talked about, but only when you've then done the piece of work and everybody's looking at it does everybody realize it does need to change and iterations need to be made. And when you start to realize that it's not necessarily you that they're criticizing, but sometimes their own brief or all of our decisions on what we were going to create, when it's actually created, it's just not what we needed. So that helped me to think, even if it's perfect, it might not be right.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think I've mentioned this to you before, but I obviously do a lot of mentoring as well as being a line manager for God knows how many years of many different people. And typically one of the things people struggle with in general is, letting go of the idea of that personal accountability. I think it's really important to have high accountability, absolutely. But that really high personal accountability, it can really impact someone's mental strength. And I purposely say mental strength as opposed to mental health, because resilience is really important. And that was the second thing I was going to say is learning how to be resilient. And I've definitely learned that from women I admire that I've worked with and from female leaders I've worked for that have got this amazing resilience, this ability to stay calm in all crises, which is not my natural disposition, but I try really hard, and it's something that I continually work at. And well, a lot of people actually broadly have to work at being resilient because, and I've talked about this on my own LinkedIn Live series, which is that, no one's 100% resilient, but things like the pandemic and redundancy and all these external things that happen and are happening more frequently in the world of work, really you have to build up that level of resilience because, we don't always get it right all the time, and things are going to come at us out of left field that we won't even foresee. And keeping that level of resilience, particularly in moments of crisis. And if you have a large team of people relying on you, having that ability to be resilient, it's okay, it's fine, not the end of the world. We'll find a solution. That's a killer skill for sure.
Yeah, and then you become that person that you mentioned about who always seems calm and collected in these situations, which is great for them to see as well.
Underneath, I'm doing it.
Like a swan. Yes. So you mentioned about mentoring. You've been doing mentoring for quite some time now.
Yeah.
In your experience, how can mentors effectively support people in the workplace, but also women in the workplace navigating some of these challenges?
So broadly, how can mentoring support? I would say it gives you a different perspective. A lot of us think, I can only talk to my manager about things, or there's something you want to talk about that you don't want to talk about your manager, so you talk to your peer about it, or you talk to somebody else in the world of work and you think that there's just those like four walls, or you go home and then you like verbally assassinate your partner with all of, this is happening, I don't know what to do. And like 9 times out of 10, you do something completely different to your partner, and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. You said about a million different acronyms, and who's this person, that person, the other? I don't know, and you're like, I need somebody to talk to. And I think why I use that sort of broad example is that mentoring can really help having that external person to you. And I think the misconception with mentoring as well is that they have to be more senior than you, or they have to be older than you. I would say reverse mentoring is super powerful for anybody, whether you're a man or a woman, because, I learn things from the people I mentor. They might not realise they're teaching me stuff, but I've learned a lot, particularly when I've been mentoring younger people or people in entry-level roles and different generation. And I'm like, I haven't thought about it like that. Or then on the flip side, when I'm in much older people or that are in a different generation, but the other side of the fence, I'm like, I definitely am not going to repeat that mistake, or that's an interesting way of thinking about it. So I think broadly, it's a great learning vehicle. It's a way to have a sounding board that's not necessarily in your direct life, because they give you that kind of fresh perspective.
You were talking about how when you're potentially at home with a partner who might 9 times out of 10 not know what on earth you're talking about, it made me think, do you see value in having a mentor who does understand your industry and your sector that you're working in, so that they do have the context that someone else might not?
I mean, I can see both sides of the fence, right? So typically I mentor women in tech, digital and operations and leadership. And that's because those are kind of my 4 kind of areas that I know really well. However, I have also mentored people, I say people because there's a man and a woman in my mind about this, that are in a completely different industry, are wanting to be mentored on a sort of soft, well, I say soft skills. My co-host would shoot me for saying that because she loves the word power skills, and I totally agree. They're power skills, and power skills are transferable skills. So if the thing you're wanting to be mentored about is your power skills, so things like communication, leadership, collaboration, those types of things, then I think your industry is agnostic. But if there's something specific that's like, so for example, I've been invited onto a program to mentor in a specific tech space, and they've asked me to specifically mentor people that work in that specific platform domain.
Right.
Yeah, so what I suspect is the person I will get matched with will have very specific questions about, okay, so I work in this world. When you worked in this world, how did you do this, that, and the other? And so that's contextualized. I think industry can also be agnostic. So I've mentored other people who, whilst they work in a kind of tech profession, they work in a completely different industry like media, the airline industry and hotels, like
Okay, hospitality.
yeah, hospitality. That's exactly. Sorry, afternoon brain. So I have no experience in any of those things, but the things they wanted mentoring on are again transferable across the vertical of technology. Sorry,
Yeah.
I gave you a very broad answer there, but I do think that it really depends on what the mentee needs. And I
Yeah,
think
I
that's
agree.
the first thing. The mentee needs to know what their goals are and what it is they want out of a mentor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then when we're talking about the mentor, what
Yeah.
kind of qualities or skills or power skills do you think that a mentor needs to have before they can go into that area?
I'd say they need to be a good listener because, I mean, everybody should be a good listener, and listening is a very hard skill to master. I wrote a post about it not too long ago. But listening is really important because, again, I'd say most of the time people will say, I want to be mentored on this very specific thing. They've set their goal. And I sit and I listen to what they've got to say. And most of the time, the thing that we end up mentoring them on is not the specific thing that they came with. And I think it's really important to be able to listen, to be able to actually extrapolate what it is this person really needs help with. Because a lot of the time, I find that people want to mentor when they're in a moment of, oh no, I don't know what to do, crisis, like I don't like my job anymore, and I don't want to do this, and they're panicked. And they think, oh, this one thing that's going to solve it all. And actually, when you listen to them, so a good example is where somebody says, "Oh, I want to be better at leading meetings and be more confident at leading meetings." And you start listening to what they're saying, and actually, what you then end up hearing is they struggle to navigate ambiguity. By which I mean, Emily, you've asked them a very difficult question, and they don't know what the answer is, so they panic and they don't want to be in that position, and it makes them nervous and they feel unconfident about going into meetings and just build the whole scenario.
Yeah.
Actually, the thing we then end up working on is how do you navigate that ambiguity? How do you get comfortable with saying, Emily, I'm really sorry, I don't know the answer to that right now, but let me take it away and I will come back to you. That is a completely different thing to master. So yeah.
Yeah. So you've got to be able to dig in and not
Absolutely.
take the
Listening is
surface
number
level.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's really hard because there's listening and then there's active listening. And active listening is one of the hardest skills to master, and it takes a lot of time. So you've got to be prepared to go on the journey of honing that skill. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think then the other things I would say is that as a mentor, you have to be really committed to wanting to do this because, you know, you're impacting and helping to shape somebody's career here. And yes, you're not their line manager. And most of the time as a mentor, you're doing it as voluntary, but you have to have the want and the compassion to want to do it and to make the time to do it. And equally, I'd say the same back to a mentee. You know, if you want to take somebody's time, and typically it's somebody who's carving time out of their diary, don't turn up late, don't cancel like 5 minutes in, own your agenda, do any homework that they set you. Yes, I am that mentor that sets homework. But, you know, I think being respectful of each other's time, that's really important. And then also, you know, if you don't know, if you can't help them or you don't think it's the right fit, it's your responsibility to say that kind of upfront, both ways again.
Yeah, absolutely. I set homework too, by the way. So
I'm not surprised.
So when you mentioned just then making sure that you speak up if it's not the right fit, what would you say is the best strategy for finding a mentor that is right for you?
So most of the time when I'm mentoring, I'm matched and do it through various programs. However, sometimes I'm contacted directly outside of a program because somebody's seen some content I put on LinkedIn, or they've done a search for somebody that works with my profile and they're interested in, you know, learning something from me. And so what I always do is I always have a first initial session and I get them to talk about what their goals are, what they want to get out of mentoring, how they see a mentor be able to help them. I set out my expectations, which are you're the mentee, you drive the relationship, so therefore you're responsible for setting up the calls. you're responsible for driving the agenda. And then I obviously introduced the fact that I am a mentor that sets homework, because that's not for everybody, and some people won't have the time to do that. Can I help this person? Number one.
Yeah.
Is there a fit? And if not, is there anybody else I can think of that might be able to help them that would be better suited than me instead?
Yeah.
And those are kind of the things I run through. But that's definitely evolved as I've mentored more and more people. And I have turned down a couple of people because for one reason, I couldn't give them what they needed in terms of my depth of knowledge in that particular area. But I did then go on to introduce them to somebody else in my network that had a lot of depth in that area. And then secondarily, I have terminated somebody after 3 sessions where they constantly just turned up late, forgot about the session. Like, I don't have time to do that, particularly because, you know, I mentor a lot of people and I also have direct reports. I'm not to have my own life and full-time job. So
yeah, and you know what, they're probably not ready for the mentoring.
It's interesting what you say about not being ready for mentoring, because a lot of people are like, oh, I need a mentor. But when I don't know whether you've had many mentors, Emily, but when I first got asked if I wanted to be mentored, I was asked by somebody that was the chief operating officer of a small business I worked in. I didn't know what it was, but I thought, oh my God, this woman's genuinely interested in me. I went, yeah, sure. I went along, we had 1 session. She asked me a bunch of questions. I didn't really know what I was supposed to do. I was quite nervous. I was very young. And it just sort of fizzled out. And I think a lot of that was because I didn't know what the expectations were. I didn't really know what it was that I needed. I just thought, oh my God, this is a great opportunity. And, you know, when you're young and you're in the beginning of your career, like, you just say yes, right? So you really have to understand what it's about and what the commitment is on both sides.
Yeah, mine was quite similar actually, but mine was my line manager's line manager. And so, you know, this was like still technically a direct manager of mine, really, and an absolutely incredible mentor. I was so early on in my career, stepping up into leadership for the first time, and I didn't have the experience to be doing the job that I was doing, but I got the opportunity, which is brilliant. And they mentored me through it. But at the time, for me, because I didn't have a clue what mentoring was, it felt almost just like going into these sessions and trying to find out what I should be doing for the next 2 weeks and then doing it and then going back and like, what's next? And I went through my mentoring course. I learned so much about how it's really about helping that person to come to their own conclusion and to work things out for themselves, and you're kind of facilitating that thought process rather than just giving advice. And I think the first mentor that I had, I received a lot of really brilliant advice, and I'm so grateful for that advice, but I don't know how much I used my own brain to work things out until a bit later on in my career.
I think it's that age-old thing, which is the difference between a mentor and a coach, isn't it? And so absolutely, as you say, with coaching, it's about the person being able to self-solve by being asked a clever set of questions which makes them think. Whereas with the mentoring, it's definitely more advice-based, but I think I always try to make it as practical as possible. So it's kind of probably more of a hybrid approach for me, which is I give advice, but then that's why I then set them homework to do, to get them to think about, because, you know, you only have typically an hour a month, and, you know, there's only so much you can cover. And it's really, for me, that hour is listening, giving them some thoughts, and then going, okay, go away and have a think about trying this, and then actually going out and doing it on their own. I think exactly to what you just said, it's about, you know, being mature enough and knowing what you want as well to have that kind of independent thought.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's loads of really good tips there for people who are considering getting a mentor or becoming a mentor, actually. I want to move on to a different topic now, one that I'm really interested in. You wrote a LinkedIn article back in January about something called the Queen Bee syndrome, and I will put the link to the article in the notes because it's very interesting for anybody to go and have a read. Can you tell me, as if I haven't read it, a little bit more about this concept? What's a queen bee and why is it harmful in the workplace?
Okay, so I'm going to just read the definition that I put in my article, and then we'll talk a bit more about it. So it says, Queen bee syndrome is a term used to describe a workplace phenomenon in which a high-ranking female employee, often a manager, intimidates and excludes her female subordinates, creating a hostile and uncomfortable work environment. So, I guess the context behind why I wrote an article about this was not actually that much to do with me, albeit I have encountered said queen bee in maybe two of my former line managers I can think of definitely were queen bee. However, that person doesn't always have to be your line manager. I wrote it partly because of the mentoring I do. I also have a broad network of friends and colleagues from different roles, jobs, communities that I'm in. And overwhelmingly, the past year in particular, I have heard more and more stories where people are telling me how awful their female manager is or their woman boss is. And it's not, and I guess what I talk about in my article is, is there something different between a horrible boss and a queen bee? And essentially, a man could be a horrible boss, but wouldn't necessarily be a queen bee. But essentially, a queen bee is a horrible boss. It's just one type of horrible boss. So the reason it's so important was because so many people were talking to me about it. I just thought we need to shine a light on this. It's 2024. Why on earth are we still having this conversation? Because I also think about my leadership style and other female leaders that I've worked with, worked for, and who I admire, and the consistently overwhelming majority are all people and all styles which are inclusive and supportive. And a lot of the content I write on about women in particular on LinkedIn, I'll use the hashtag women supporting women, because still in this day and age, we have women keeping other women down, like there's not enough seats at the table. Screw the bloody table, let's get some more seats. It really annoys me because I don't understand why we can't support each other, why we can't lift each other up, why we're not creating this strong community. There's plenty of research that says female leaders are incredible leaders, have these incredible traits. And to answer the second part of your question, why this is harmful, is we are destroying other women's self-confidence. They're wanting to also have a seat at that table, take that next promotion, ask for a pay rise. These women that are behaving like this are destroying a next generation of women. They're not role modeling. And there's so many of us out there, I include you in that, Emily, that from a leadership perspective, that role model our behaviour, that practice what we preach, that support women, and a good example for me is that I am child-free by choice. And that doesn't mean that I wouldn't support my female staff that have children. And I remember a member of my team who had a child said to me, I'm so sorry, but she's poorly. I was like, it's okay, no problem. I was like, go and pick her up from nursery. And she was panicked. And I was like, I spoke to her about it afterwards. And I said, why are you so panicked? I was like, it's fine. You never give me a reason not to think that you'll get the work done. I trust you. Like, you need to go take some time to your daughter. That's cool with me. And she was like, all the other female bosses I ever had have been awful to me about it whenever my children have been sick. I'm like, are you kidding me? I don't even have children. I don't plan to have them. But it just annoys me so much that we should be supporting each other. And then you've got these queen bees that still exist in the workplace that aren't.
I suppose it must come from, because of the name of it, there can only be one queen bee in the hive. And is the concept that it comes from, in the past, there has been such little, representation of women at the top that they believe in their mind that other women are a threat to their success.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, and partly I think it's a generational thing, and I'd hope that it's going to start to die out. However, I can think of people that are in our generation that I've seen as line managers who have behaved this way. But I think they picked up on bad behaviour, and the less of it there is, the less it's going to be role modelled into other women trying to work their way up the ladder, so to speak. Not that I believe in laddered careers anymore. It's very much about a squiggy career. But do you know how old this saying is? It was coined in the 70s. It's crazy that it's existed since the 70s. And there's a great saying, right? You might have heard this. Madeleine Albright, the former US Secretary of State, this is a quote that's so widely used. She's like, there is a special place in hell for women who don't help other women.
Yeah.
And she is so right. Because
Yeah.
why are we thinking that we've got to control that one space? Just because I'm there doesn't mean I can't bring you up with me. And this is particularly prevalent in male-dominated industries, I will say. I don't know about you, but over the years, I've certainly been the token woman in the room. That's getting less and less now, but we still have this queen bee phenomenon where other women are being kept down because for fear that the more senior woman will lose her position.
Yeah.
Crazy
It's crazy. It's very interesting topic, really. Like, when I was trying to think back around my experiences, I've never had a female line manager, which is,
ever.
Never. I've had female leaders above me, but never a line manager. And so that's something that I suppose in my head I've put on a pedestal of, wouldn't it be amazing? Because wouldn't they be empathetic, and wouldn't they understand what what I'm experiencing? Not necessarily true, but I have been in situations where there have been female leaders in other departments in the business, and I've been able to watch the way that they lead. And I specifically can think back to before I was in a leadership position. I can think back to 2 female leaders in other departments, one of whom I used to admire so much. I used to watch everything that she did. That's the kind of leader I want to be, desperately. The other one, people at that company used to call this lady the red bus because she would throw people underneath it.
Wow. It's interesting you say that, because that is typical queen bee trait. So one of the bosses I had definitely did that. And I think a lot of it was to do with her insecurities. And because she couldn't hold her own against the louder voices in the room, she just took her own team under the bus.
Yeah.
It's dreadful. Like, when I talk about leadership, I often talk about like being a people first leader, and I make a point of leading from the front. So, when you're in a management or a leadership role, you're there to, in part to protect your team. The higher up you go, the more risk you take on, therefore, your accountability increases. It just baffles me that, there are C-level or director level people that chuck their own teams under the bus. The people that are there to support you and that you're there to support. I always say that I'm only successful as a leader if my team is successful, right? But there are women that don't think so.
Of being able to snap our fingers and reduce or remove this phenomenon, which unfortunately, although we'd like to, we can't do. There's a few things I want to go into. I want to first start with, if you are in the workplace and you might be thinking that you're encountering a queen bee, but you're not sure whether you are, how can people who are listening actually identify what queen bee behaviour is? So one of those examples that we've just touched upon is throwing people under the bus. What could some of the other ones look like?
Manipulation, everyday put downs, excessive monitoring of your work, always choosing a male colleague to deputise for them over a female colleague. Trying to think what else. It's subtle, because it wouldn't have been able to exist for as long as possible because it's so subtle. And one of the reasons, and interestingly, Glassdoor did some research on this, which they said that women are more likely to be bullied in the workplace, because let's face it, this queen bee behaviour is bullying. You have to call a spade in that. They've said that women are more likely to encounter bullying in the workplace than men. And the number one reason they cited for that is because women are less likely to speak up and be confident in speaking up to say it's happening to them. So because it's subtle, and because of that nature, and thinking about the fact it was coined in the 70s, this is why in 2024, you and I are still having this conversation, which is,
So then, what's the advice that we can give to people who are handling a queen bee, who are working with a queen bee? How can they speak up? How can they overcome that challenge?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? Because every business has its own set of politics, and I think no two circumstances are the same. What I would say is, don't be afraid to speak up. but find the right person to speak up to. Now, that might be a peer, it might be somebody more senior than that. It might be that you just want to say to somebody else that you trust, have you noticed that XYZ person behaves? Because it also can lead to a bit of gaslighting, right? Because you're thinking, did this really happen? And you sort of gaslight yourself.
Yeah.
So those are who you can speak to. Now, you could also speak to somebody from HR if you felt that, or the people team if you felt comfortable in that. But I think the only thing I will say is that, you know, HR people functions are there for the business. So not always the right avenue to go in. The other thing I'd say is this is another thing to talk to your mentor about. And then I guess another actor that you could talk to in the workplace is try and identify who sponsors you, and by which I mean, you know, that person that advocates or defends you when you're not in the room, or suggests like, oh, Emily, you'd be great at this. I'm going to put you on this. Like, try and find those people, because these are all good people to speak up to. If you don't feel that you can speak to anybody in the workplace, then, you know, a mentor externally, or you need to start planning your exit strategy, I'm afraid. When I think about the 2 times that I've experienced it, the one I definitely plotted an exit strategy for, and then the other I found a way to navigate having a different line manager. But that comes with experience and
it's not always possible.
Understanding the politics of the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's really interesting. So one thing that your article suggested, big call to action, I suppose, from your article is more women need to support each other. You've encouraged that. Obviously, that's a huge step, and I think everybody who's listening to this will be thinking about that and how they can do that in their environment. But I'm actually quite curious how companies can step up to create an environment that does encourage these female leaders to support each other and reduce that chance of queen bee behavior cropping up.
I think a lot of it's cultural, and I know that's an easy thing to say, but when I think about the amazing company I work for and the incredible culture that exists there, and I don't say that lightly because I've worked in lots of places that sort of have a good culture and some that have a terrible culture, but I think I've been in my career for long enough to recognize what I would call amazing. And it's creating that safe space, it's creating a culture where you don't have lots of hierarchy, and where you do have hierarchy, it doesn't matter so much. It's not, oh, I need to speak to this person, no, I can't possibly speak to you because you're beneath me. Those types of, that sort of thing. I think also offering leadership programs. So where I work, they have just launched 3 different types of leadership programs, and it helps you to build your network and your community. And I think I'm very lucky of having that with my current employer for sure. But culture is definitely one of the things that businesses can do to make it a safe space, but also be transparent about what you're doing to help women in leadership. You see lots of businesses like, oh, it's International Women's Day. And again, I wrote a post about this. So I'm kind of a bit turned off by International Women's Day now, because it just has become such a commercialized buzzword day that it's lost its meaning from all the things you want to do, And then I guess another thing is really showing that you're building a program and a talent pipeline of, you want women in your head staff and your directors, and what you're doing to do that, and having an element of community and belonging. I come back to that again, whether it's through different groups or just a belonging committee. And there's lots of different things businesses can do, but it's very easy to just post something on LinkedIn on one day, or write something on your website that says we're inclusive in our hiring processes. And I guess that's something else, is that just to be really transparent about what you're doing. So how are you trying to hire more women into the business? And how you're doing it in a way that's not positive discrimination, because whilst I think there should be more women in the workplace and more senior roles, I want that through merit and equity. 100%. I don't want that through positive discrimination of, oh, I need to hire a woman for this
not
particular role. So those, I think, is just some of the things, and really investing in that equity piece of ED&I. and making it fair and easy for women to get into those roles. I say easier, by which I mean getting the fairness in the first place, you know?
Yeah.
And I think one of the other things linked to this is that I've encountered where I've tried to promote a woman before and I've had to go and explain it to a panel. You have to prove that they can actually do it so much more than you do for a man. And this is something else, you know, it's like people hire men based on potential, but women based on what they've actually done and what they can do. And I just, again, these are just things that you can address within your culture of your business.
Yeah.
And I think when you have those types of things in place and you have that as a foundation, then there is no need for a queen bee. And that eradicates it. And yes, it's a long game, I get that. But I also think there's a generation of us, you know, we all recognise this and we don't want it anymore. And we, you know, want to do better. And so I think it is dying out. I hope it is anyway. And I hope it will continue to bang the drum, because I guess something else to share with your audience is the Workplace Bullying Institute in 2022 did a piece of research, and they found that women are bullied by other women 80% of the time. We've got to get that down.
That's a horrible statistic.
It's a horrible statistic.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think it's not men holding women back in the workplace so much now. It's women holding each other back. And the other thing I would say is really encouraging allyship in your business is another key thing. You know, we've all been in those big leadership meetings where there's lots of loud voices and you can't trying to chip in and you can't say your piece because you might be, you know, a more considerate leader in terms of your style and you only really want to speak when you've got something valid to say. And allyship comes in where one of your male colleagues might go, well, hold on a second, Charlotte, what is it you're trying to say? Or, well, I think we should hear from Charlotte now. You know, include that inclusivity and building that, and it comes from the top and it has to come down that way. It can't be something that's what I would call people powered, because it's got to come from the leadership of the business.
Yeah, that those moments are, they always fill my heart when they happen, because I think it is really supportive. And I was laughing when you were saying about those meetings, because I'm thinking of some meetings in particular that we've been in together. So
that's what I was thinking about too.
And one thing that you said when you mentioned about things that companies can do, which I think was a really good point, is facilitating situations where different women across the business, or not necessarily just women, but different people across the business can be connected. And actually what I thought back to was, the more people you're connected with in leadership positions, the more you can see these positive leadership styles, so that then if you do come across somebody who's showing these signs of queen bee behavior, then you can identify which are the types of people you can go to, because you've identified those other people in the company who do have that positive mentality and are supportive. Yeah.
100% agree. And also, if you see your peer behaving that way, call her out. Like, frankly, I don't want to work with people like that. I'm a people first leader. I believe that you have to inspire and enable your people to be successful. And you sure as hell aren't going to do that by manipulating them or putting them down or keeping them down to make yourself feel better. If anything, you're actually just making the performance of your team so much worse. And then, you know, eventually when that woman's had enough, and then will reach a point where she will have and she leaves, you've then got to backfill her. And the cost of that to a business is, I think, something like 3 times the person's salary to replace them. You know, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But I guess my other call to action would be that, you know, if you see any of your colleagues, whether you're a manager or whether you're in a leadership position, you call them out and you say, you know, you might not call them out in a public space, depending on what's happening, but you might want to pull them to one side and say, I think you shouldn't be speaking to somebody like that. And you have a chat with them as a peer, because maybe they don't realise they're doing it, and maybe they are new in a management or leadership position, and maybe that's all they ever knew, and that's how they experience the world of work. but we have a duty to lift all women up.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better myself. So yeah, I agree. Thank you so much. That's such good advice. I just have one more question actually before we go, and we ask this question to everybody. I'm really excited to see what bit of advice you suggest. But it is, what is the best piece of advice that you have personally received from a leader in tech?
I would say the best piece of advice I was ever given is be yourself. And that's a really bland thing to say, but the person who gave me this advice was the only female in the all-male executives team. And there was some things that I was hearing that were coming out of the boardroom into the rest of the business. And I went over and I said to her, do you know that this is being said about you? Because I was naturally protective. She's my boss. Like, I really liked her. I really respected her. And she just turned around to me and she said, it's fine. She said, it's important to be yourself. She said, I'm not going to pretend to be somebody I'm not. I am challenging the status quo and it needs to be challenged. And I've taken that with me as much as I can. And actually, somebody who wrote me a recommendation not so long ago said something about, she's always willing to challenge the status quo. I'm not going to change my style to mirror being a man, because that quite often leads to queen bee behaviour, because queen bees think they are being a leader by behaving what they purport to be a man. Also, female leaders, by being themselves, have proved to be incredibly successful and powerful at what they do. And I refuse to say be your authentic self, because that doesn't feel authentic to me, but be yourself and don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. And best advice I was ever given.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Sounds so simple, doesn't it? But it's very important.
Very hard to achieve.
And also, it's hard to change yourself and keep sticking with a changed version of yourself. You don't need to be acting all day. You're not going to do your best work in that kind of mindset, to be honest with you. Yeah.
No, and I think people see through it, to be honest, Emily. And I think, you know, as I've got older and more experienced, I definitely think I'm more comfortable with who I am, what I'm about, and what I stand for, and I'm much clearer about my personal brand. And that's definitely linked to that advice, because if you want to stand for certain things, be prepared for people to talk about it. It might not always be complimentary, but at least they're talking. And, you know, it's driving conversation, which might drive some important change into the business.
Honestly, I think we've really covered some great topics today. Anybody listening who's thinking about going into mentorship or finding themselves a mentor, there's some great advice there for what to think about. And we've dug into what the Queen Bee syndrome is. Again, I'm going to put the link. Definitely have a read up on it if you haven't done so far. There's lots that we can be doing to make improvements in this area. First of all, Charlotte, do not stop banging your drum. I think it's really important. I'm going to start banging my drum more. Thank you for joining us and for sharing all of the really important bits of advice with us.
Thanks so much for having me, Emily. I really enjoyed being on your show.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of LeadHERs in Tech. Your support means the world to us, and we're incredibly grateful for the opportunity to share these empowering stories with you. If you're listening on a podcast platform and you believe in our mission to amplify the voices of women in tech, please take a moment to leave us a rating. It really helps us grow and reach more listeners. And don't forget to subscribe and share this episode with others. Anyone watching on YouTube, engagement makes a big difference, so please subscribe to our channels and give this episode a like and share. If you resonated with any of the topics today or have some similar experiences, then we want to hear from you in the comments section. Let's keep the conversation going. Your contribution is not just a favour, it's a powerful step towards change. Remember, every story shared and every voice heard can ignite a spark in someone's career. So, if you know an amazing woman with a story that needs to be heard, please nominate them. Thanks again for listening and for being part of this journey.